Hey everyone, welcome back to some new r/malicious compliance stories. I hope you had a great day. In today's episode, OP learns how to really handle a crazy appointment policy. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The first story is called No Longer Needed. This is a story one of my coworkers told me while we were chatting in the lab. He's a recent hire after getting laid off from one of the big three car companies, and unfortunately very common history for someone to have in my area. However, he was cheered up immensely because of how badly they'd screwed themselves over by letting him go. He told me how the company had him specialize in a very technical software project. He was the only guy who knew how to use the requisite tools and was the de facto expert on how the code was structured and how it worked. No one else felt the need to get up to speed or brush up on it because he handled it all. He had much free time as he had no other assignments. So he ended up working way ahead of schedule. He finished not only the software, but the security audits, reports, and all sorts of documentation that would have been necessary once the project was finalized. He kept these pre-produced deliverables in his personal directory so that he could have them ready in a flash when the company asked for them. Well, a car company's favorite pastime is layoffs. They decided he was no longer necessary and canned him. In retrospect, their unwillingness to get him started on any other project was a red flag. Knowing exactly what kind of hot water they would be in without him, he happily deactivated his employee account and subsequently deleted everything on his personal drive. The remaining project team members rapidly discovered how screwed they were when they tried to provide a status on his software. They realized none of them knew anything about how it worked, how finished it was, or how to continue working on it. No one had bothered to have it explained while he was still there. One of his buddies on the team called him up a few days later, begging him to help him out and just let him have the files he'd completed ahead of time. My coworker felt conflicted because he had no real grudge against the employees who were stuck in this situation. But obviously, no one had those files anymore, since he was no longer an employee. He basically told his friend that the company had dug its own grave and he couldn't help in any way besides giving him some tips off the top of his head from what he remembered. He told me he somewhat regretted helping them out on his own time, but ultimately just hope management learned their lesson. And that's the point when you call them and offer your freelance rates. Am I the only one who finds it troublesome that he has a complete project team around it and he's the only one who has the software in its current state? And why didn't the company make automatic backups from development machines? That should be standard. The next story is called The Good Old Days When People Worked for Free. I began working payroll at 16 years old. I'm incredibly good with numbers, as well as dealing with clients. Suffice it to say, I'm good at what I do. Many years ago, I began working with a very small payroll company with only 4 workers. I really liked the owner, Jack, and honestly still do. He's a decent dude. I also really liked the work and the clients. However, I was not fond of Paula or Will. Paula, a colleague, missed so much work, and I'm pretty sure no one has 5 grandfathers that died within 3 years. Will was the worst supervisor I have ever had. He took smoke breaks every 30 minutes, he always thought he was right, and boy, he loved to talk. There were times where he was monologuing to a client who had hung up 30 minutes prior, and no, I am not exaggerating. However, he was the owner's father-in-law whose prior business went bankrupt. Basically, he was never going to be fired. In that work setting, I absolutely shined. I was the best employee by a huge margin. One day, Will calls me into his office and lets me know that I am getting too much overtime. This was a small business and I needed to be careful. Now, I never took much overtime. Overall, I usually had around 2 to 5 minutes by the end of the week. Simply because I lived 5 minutes away and clocked in when I got in and settled, even if it was a minute early. So I agreed to the new rule with a bit of glee. From then on, if I got in early, I would get ready to clock in and then play on my phone or read for 1 minute before clocking in. This drove Will absolutely crazy. After I did this for a few days, he called me back into his office. He told me about the good old days when people would work even without pay in order to excel at life. I politely reminded him that we were a payroll company, so he should be aware that it is illegal to not pay workers for time worked. From that point on, he would simply mutter under his breath and glare at me. After 3 or 4 weeks, the owner Jack calls me into his office. Apparently, Will had been complaining about me, about how I wasn't working hard and was being disrespectful. I explained the situation to him, and I pointed out that no client had ever been unhappy with me, that I showed up to work every day on time, and that I had the most duties with the least problems. Basically, I reminded him that I was his only good employee. Jack was a little shocked and annoyed that my tiny amount of overtime was the reason I was sitting in his office. He told me that if I needed it, I could have up to 30 minutes of overtime without needing it to be approved, and he also gave me a small raise for being such a hard worker. Finally, he told me that if Will ever gave me another rule that I disagreed with, I should go directly to him. Jack then called Will into his office, and I heard quite a bit of yelling. When Will came back out, he looked like he had just sucked a lemon. It's my fondest memory of Will. A great boss and a crappy supervisor. Was there really ever a time where it was common to work for free? I mean, every company would love this, but that sounds crazy to me. The third story is called He Wouldn't Accept a No. When I was in college, I worked for a dollar store. The boss was great about giving people unpaid time off whenever they asked for it, as long as they asked for it far enough in advance. I always got the time off that I asked for. One time, I was working on some schoolwork in my university's library, and I got a call from a coworker. He was asking me if I could cover his closing shift that night, which started at 5:30, because it was his birthday and he had forgotten to ask off. I explained to him that because of my classes that night, I couldn't do it, as I wouldn't be able to get there on time. He begged me and begged me to make the shift. He called and texted me a couple more times over the next half hour or so. And I said not unless he could somehow make it so that it would be okay for me to get there an hour to 1.5 hours late. Eventually, he asked me to get in touch with our general manager and ask her if it would be okay. At this point, I had it, so I told him I would text the boss. What I didn't tell him is that I texted her something along the lines of, "Hey boss, this coworker keeps hassling me to take a shift." I told him I couldn't because of my classes, and he wouldn't take it for an answer, so he keeps asking me to get in touch with you. Now I have. It's important to note that my boss would get upset with me if she even thought I was missing class to come to work. Goodness, she was awesome. A few minutes after I sent that text, I got a call from one of the assistant managers asking me if it was true that I had agreed to cover his shift. I explained to her what I told the coworker. She said that he had convinced one of the day shift workers to stay late until I got there. When I went in, I found out that the general manager had called the store after I texted her, since she wasn't actually there when this went down. She basically told the coworker that he's bothering people and he needs to knock it off, and that is a good way to get himself fired. Well, no means no, so yeah, he was right to involve the boss. And how can you forget to ask for free time on your birthday? It's not like the date changes every year. The last story is called Cancelled Appointment. This happened about 4 years ago when I got a summer job at my university. The job was working for professors that I had worked with before. They asked me last minute to teach a summer workshop to 9th and 10th graders. So with less than 2 weeks before the camp starts, I have a bunch of paperwork to do first, including clearances that say I can work with kids. One of these is an official check for which I need my fingerprints. Well, I needed to do the physical fingerprinting right away in order to get the results in time. Luckily, I was able to book a fingerprinting appointment for that Friday, booked 24 hours in advance as required, which would be just barely enough time to get the result. That Friday, I caught the subway to campus, and it's atrociously slow. I'll admit I should have planned for this. The subway here is always behind. Anyway, I end up slightly late getting to campus, so I literally run to the police station and enter the front room exactly 5 minutes after my appointment time. I know this because as I stepped through the door, I felt my phone buzz with what turned out to be a "Your appointment has been cancelled" email. I speak to the cop behind the bulletproof glass inside, and I learn that the appointment was cancelled after he checks my confirmation number. Apparently, they are automatically cancelled if you are not checked in within 5 minutes. Obviously, this is outrageous, but I'm usually a patient guy. I asked if I can book a new appointment. But that's no good, since it would have to be Monday or later. So I grab a coffee from across the street and return to sit inside the police station to try and solve this with some Googling while I slip into a more and more frantic state of frustration. I can't find anywhere in the city that can fingerprint me before Monday. But here's what really pushed me over the edge. While I'm sitting there, at this point, 30 minutes past my appointment time, someone else comes in for fingerprints. She shows up 5 minutes early. They take her in immediately, and she's out before her appointment was even scheduled to begin. The entire thing took her about 2 minutes. I point out to the cop behind the glass, as politely as I can, that clearly someone could see me right now because her appointment is already over. Why can't I have the current slot? But the cop insists that since my appointment was cancelled, my registration info was no longer in the system, and I can't be seen today. That's when the idea comes to me, and I confirm with him that showing up early is not a problem, because they would have my appointment and registration info in the system. So I quietly sit back down and take out my phone. About 10 minutes later, I calmly approach him again and say, "Hello, I have a new appointment to be fingerprinted." I'm about 72 hours early. I've never seen such an exasperated sigh in my life. But he checked my new confirmation number and everything was in order. Within 10 minutes, I was walking back out after getting fingerprinted. Well, that sounds like a stupid system. Why would they delete all the data after 5 minutes? Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day. Bye bye.